When Eric asked why I wasn't wearing my mother's emerald necklace to our anniversary dinner, I smiled and pulled out the pawn shop receipt with his signature on it. "The same reason you've been lying about those business trips to Atlantic City," I said, sliding a folder of casino photos across the table. His face went white as our server became a witness to 23 years of marriage crashing down in the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan. I sat across from my husband Eric in Le Bernardin, watching him fidget with his cufflinks as he scanned the crowded dining room. The soft murmur of conversations in French and English filled the space between us, punctuated by the gentle clink of crystal glasses and sterling silver against fine china. This was supposed to be our 23rd wedding anniversary celebration, but Eric couldn't seem to focus on anything except my bare neck. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." "Priscilla," he said for the third time in 10 minutes, his voice carrying that edge of controlled irritation I'd grown to recognize over the years. "Where's your mother's necklace? You always wear it to our anniversary dinners." I took a slow sip of the Chateau de Cam he'd ordered, letting the golden wine coat my tongue while I studied his face. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read every micro-expression, every tell. The way his left eye twitched when he was lying. How his jaw tightened when he was angry but trying to appear calm. The particular shade of pale his skin turned when he was caught off guard. Right now, Eric was displaying all three. "My mother's necklace," I repeated slowly, setting down my wine glass with deliberate precision. "You mean the emerald and diamond piece that's been in my family for 4 generations? The one worth $85,000 that my grandmother gave me on her deathbed?" Eric's hand stilled on his cufflink. "Yes, that one. You've worn it to every anniversary dinner since our 2nd year of marriage. It's tradition." I reached into my Hermes clutch, the one Eric had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, back when he still pretended to care about meaningful gifts. My fingers found the folded papers I'd been carrying for the past week, waiting for exactly this moment. "Traditions are funny things, aren't they, Eric?" I said, pulling out the pawn shop receipt and placing it on the white tablecloth between us. "Sometimes they get interrupted by unexpected circumstances. Like when your husband of 23 years sells your most precious family heirloom for $8,000 to cover his gambling debts." The color drained from Eric's face so quickly I thought he might faint. His eyes fixed on the receipt, specifically on his own signature scrawled across the bottom in blue ink. The signature he'd forged my name above, thinking I'd never find out. "Priscilla, I can explain, can you?" I interrupted, my voice remaining perfectly calm despite the rage that had been building inside me for days. "Can you explain why you've been telling me you were attending medical conferences in Boston while you were actually losing our retirement savings at blackjack tables in Atlantic City?" I reached back into my clutch and withdrew a manila folder, placing it next to the pawn shop receipt. Eric's hands trembled as I opened it to reveal the first photograph, him at a casino table, chips stacked high, a blonde woman half his age leaning against his shoulder. "Or perhaps you can explain this?" I continued, flipping to the next photo. "That's you at the Borgata last Tuesday. You told me you were presenting at a cardiology symposium, but it seems the only hearts you were interested in were the ones on playing cards." Eric glanced around the restaurant, probably hoping no one was watching our little drama unfold. But I'd chosen Le Bernardin for exactly this reason. At $300 per person, it attracted Manhattan's elite people. Eric desperately wanted to impress people whose opinions mattered to his career as one of New York's most prominent cardiologists. "Priscilla, please," he whispered, leaning forward. "Can we discuss this at home? People are starting to stare." "People are starting to stare," I repeated, allowing a smile to play at the corners of my mouth. "How fascinating. Do you know what else people are starting to do, Eric? They're starting to ask questions. Like why Dr. Eric Manning, who supposedly earns $500,000 a year, needed to pawn his wife's jewelry." I flipped to another photograph in the folder. This one showed Eric at an ATM, clearly frustrated, probably hitting his daily withdrawal limit. The timestamp showed it was taken the same day he'd pawned my necklace. "Or why he's been forging his wife's signature on loan documents," I continued, producing another set of papers from my clutch. "These are copies of the paperwork you filed to take out a second mortgage on our Hamptons house. My signature, Eric, except I never signed them." Eric's breathing had become shallow, and a fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Our server, a distinguished French gentleman named Marcel, approached our table with the evening specials, but stopped short when he noticed the tension. "Perhaps I should return in a few minutes?" Marcel asked discreetly. "No, Marcel, please stay," I said, turning to him with a warm smile. "I was just sharing some exciting news with my husband. You see, after 23 years of marriage, I've Discovered that he has quite the talent for creative writing. Signatures, specifically. Marcel's eyebrows rose slightly, but his professional training kept his expression neutral. Still, I could see the interest in his eyes. In a restaurant like this, the staff had seen their share of wealthy couples drama, but this was probably something new. The second mortgage was just temporary, Eric hissed under his breath. I was going to pay it back before you found out. The necklace too. It's just a rough patch, Priscilla. I had some bad luck at the tables, but I'm done with all that now. Bad luck, I mused, pulling out my phone and scrolling to a particular screenshot. Is that what you call losing $230,000 over the past 18 months? Because I have a different term for it. Eric's face went from pale to gray. How did I find out? I finished his question. Well, it's amazing what a good private investigator can discover when they put their mind to it. Catherine Morrison comes highly recommended, by the way. Former FBI Financial Crimes Division. She was very thorough. I turned my phone screen toward Eric, showing him a detailed spreadsheet of his gambling losses, complete with dates, locations, and amounts. His hands were shaking now, and I noticed that several other diners had indeed begun to take notice of our conversation. Catherine also discovered some other interesting information, I continued, flipping through more pages in the folder. Like the fact that you've been having an affair with a casino hostess named Antonia for the past 8 months. The same Antonia who appears in several of these photographs, helping you spend our money. Eric's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The confident, charming cardiologist who commanded respect in operating rooms across Manhattan had been reduced to a stammering, panicked man caught in a web of his own lies. 23 years, Eric, I said, my voice still deadly calm. 23 years of marriage, and you thought you could steal from me, lie to me, and humiliate me without consequences. You thought I was too naive, too trusting, too dependent on you to fight back. I closed the folder and placed my hands flat on the table, leaning forward slightly so only he could hear my next words. You were wrong. Eric looked around the restaurant. One more time, perhaps hoping for an escape route or divine intervention. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from what was coming next. The papers in front of him told a story of betrayal, theft, and deception that would destroy everything he'd worked to build. What do you want? He whispered finally, the question barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. I smiled then. The first genuine smile I'd worn in months. Because Eric had just asked exactly the right question, and I had been preparing my answer for days. What I want, Eric, is justice. And I'm going to get it in ways that money can't buy. Marcel cleared his throat softly, still standing patiently beside our table. Shall I give you more time to decide on your selections? Actually, Marcel, I said, gathering up the papers and photos, I think we're just getting started. My name is Priscilla Manning, and until 2 weeks ago, I believed I was living the perfect Manhattan life. At 45, I had everything a woman was supposed to want: a successful husband, a stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park, a house in the Hamptons, and enough financial security to never worry about money again. I was the wife of Dr. Eric Manning, one of New York's most prominent cardiologists, a man who saved lives by day and charmed donors at hospital galas by night. I should have known that perfection was just an illusion. Our story began 24 years ago at Columbia University Medical School. I was pursuing my MBA in healthcare administration while Eric was in his 3rd year of medical school. He was brilliant, ambitious, and had a smile that could light up any room he entered. I was immediately captivated by his passion for medicine. His dreams of revolutionizing cardiac surgery. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. Eric came from modest beginnings in Albany. His father was a high school principal, his mother a librarian. They had sacrificed everything to put him through medical school, taking out loans and working extra jobs to support his education. I admired his determination to succeed, to prove that a working-class kid could make it in the elite world of Manhattan medicine. My background was quite different. The Montgomery family had been in New York society for over a century. My great-great-grandmother, Celine Montgomery, had been one of the original founders of the Metropolitan Opera Guild. Each generation had built upon the family's social standing and financial resources. My mother, Catherine Montgomery, had been a prominent philanthropist and art collector before her death 5 years ago. When Eric and I met, he was fascinated by my world. The charity galas, the museum board meetings, the summers in the Hamptons. The connections that opened doors throughout New York's cultural and business establishments. He would often joke that I was his ticket to the upper echelons of society, but I thought he was being endearingly modest about his own considerable talents. I fell in love with his ambition, his kindness to patients, and the way he talked about our future together. He painted pictures of the life we would build, him establishing himself as a world-renowned surgeon, me using my business background to help manage his career and our investments. We would be a power couple, he said, each making the other stronger and more successful. After our wedding in 1999, I threw myself into supporting Eric's career with the same dedication I had once applied to my studies. I organized dinner parties for influential colleagues, managed our finances to maximize his earning potential, and used my family connections to help him secure his position at Mount Sinai Hospital. When he wanted to start his own cardiac surgery practice, I liquidated some of my inheritance to provide the initial funding. Eric's practice thrived beyond our wildest expectations. Within 5 years, he was performing surgery on some of the most powerful people in New York. CEOs, politicians, celebrities, they all trusted Dr. Eric Manning with their hearts. His success brought us into an even more exclusive social circle, and I reveled in our shared accomplishments. I had always been good with numbers, a talent inherited from my grandmother who had managed the family's investment portfolio with remarkable skill. I took over managing our personal finances, allowing Eric to focus entirely on his medical practice. I handled everything: our investment accounts, tax planning, real estate purchases, even the staff salaries for our household. Eric would often praise my financial acumen, saying he never had to worry about money because I was so capable. Looking back now, I realize that my competence became my weakness. Eric grew comfortable letting me handle all financial matters, which meant he could hide his gambling activities in accounts I rarely checked. He knew I trusted him completely, and he exploited that trust systematically. Our lifestyle reflected Eric's success and my family's established wealth. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue had cost $8 million, but I had considered it an investment in Eric's career. The right address mattered in his world, and our home became a showcase for entertaining his colleagues and potential patients. The dining room where we hosted dinner parties could seat 24, and our collection of contemporary art impressed even the most sophisticated guests. The house in the Hamptons had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother had left it to me specifically, understanding how much I loved spending summers there as a child. Eric had initially been overwhelmed by the grandeur of the estate, but he quickly adapted to the lifestyle it represented. He learned to sail our yacht, play tennis at the country club, and navigate the complex social dynamics of East Hampton society. For years, everything seemed perfect. Eric's medical practice generated enormous income, my investment strategies kept our wealth growing, and our social standing in Manhattan continued to rise. We attended premieres at Lincoln Center, served on hospital boards together, and were regularly featured in society magazines as one of New York's most successful couples. I had wanted children, but Eric convinced me to wait until his practice was fully established. Then we tried for several years without success, eventually learning that I had fertility issues that made pregnancy unlikely. Eric was incredibly supportive during that difficult period, holding me while I cried after each failed treatment, assuring me that our love was enough. Instead of children, we poured our energy into our careers and our social life. I became more involved in philanthropic work, serving on the boards of several cultural institutions. Eric expanded his practice and began teaching at Columbia Medical School. We traveled extensively, taking luxury vacations to Europe and Asia. From the outside, we appeared to have everything, but somewhere along the way, Eric changed. It was so gradual that I didn't notice at first. He became more secretive about his schedule, claiming he needed to attend additional medical conferences to stay current with new surgical techniques. He started working later hours, saying he was taking on more complex cases that required extensive preparation. He became moody and distracted, quick to anger over small inconveniences. I attributed these changes to the pressure of his demanding career. Cardiac surgery was incredibly stressful, and I knew that Eric felt the weight of responsibility for every patient's life. I tried to be more understanding, more supportive, taking on even more of the household management to free him from any additional stress. What I didn't understand was that Eric's personality changes weren't caused by professional pressure. They were the result of a gambling addiction that had been growing progressively worse for over 2 years. The medical conferences were covers for trips to Atlantic City and Las Vegas. The late nights weren't spent in surgery preparation but at underground poker games in Manhattan. The mood swings were the natural result of a man caught between the adrenaline highs of winning and the devastating crashes of losing enormous sums of money. Eric had become masterful at compartmentalizing his life. During the day, he was still the brilliant, compassionate surgeon his patients and colleagues respected. At home, he maintained enough of his charm and affection to keep me from suspecting anything was seriously wrong. But in secret, he was gambling. away our financial security and stealing from me to fund his addiction. The most painful realization was that Eric had been planning to leave me for months. Not because he had fallen out of love, but because he saw divorce as a financial escape route. In New York's equitable distribution state, he could potentially claim half of our assets, including properties and investments that came from my family. Inheritance. He had calculated that divorcing me would be more profitable than continuing to steal from our joint accounts, but Eric had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that I would never discover his deception until it was too late to stop him. He thought I was too trusting, too naive about his activities outside our home. He believed that 23 years of marriage had made me complacent and blind to his faults. As I sat across from him in Le Bernardin, watching panic replace the confidence he had worn like a perfectly tailored suit, I realized that Eric had never really known me at all. He had fallen in love with the idea of me, the wealthy, well-connected wife who could elevate his status and support his ambitions. But he had never understood the strength that 4 generations of Montgomery women had passed down to me. My great-great-grandmother Celine had survived the stock market crash of 1929 by making swift, decisive moves to protect the family assets. My grandmother had built the family's art collection into one of the most valuable private holdings in New York. My mother had doubled our wealth through strategic investments and charitable tax planning. Now it was my turn to protect what mattered most. And unlike Eric, I had learned that the most devastating battles aren't fought with anger or emotion. They're won through careful planning, superior information, and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. That moment had finally arrived. The emerald and diamond necklace that started this whole nightmare had been my most treasured possession for 15 years. My mother gave it to me on my 30th birthday, the same day she told me about her cancer diagnosis. She was sitting in her favorite chair in the sunroom of our family's estate, morning light streaming through the windows and catching the stones as she fastened the clasp around my neck. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother Celine," she had said, her fingers gentle against my skin. She wore it to every important event in her life. Her engagement party, her wedding, the opening nights at the Met. She believed it brought good fortune to the women in our family. I had touched the stones reverently, feeling the weight of generations of Montgomery women who had worn this piece before me. The emeralds were a deep, vivid green that reminded me of the gardens at our summer house, and the diamonds caught light like captured stars. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a tangible connection to my heritage, a symbol of the strength and elegance that defined the women in my family. "Promise me you'll wear it often," my mother had continued. "Beautiful things are meant to be enjoyed, not hidden away in safes. And promise me you'll pass it down to your daughter someday, along with the stories of all the remarkable women who wore it before her." At the time, I had every intention of keeping that promise. Eric and I were still trying to have children, and I often imagined the day I would fasten this same necklace around my daughter's neck, sharing the history and love that came with it. But as the years passed and children never came, the necklace became even more precious to me. It was my connection to the mother I had lost too soon and the family legacy I was responsible for preserving. Eric understood the necklace's significance, or at least I thought he did. He would often compliment how beautiful I looked wearing it, and he made a point of suggesting I wear it to our most important social events. Our anniversary dinners, charity galas, holiday parties with his colleagues. The necklace became part of our ritual of dressing for success. Looking back, I realize Eric's encouragement had nothing to do with sentimentality and everything to do with status. He loved how other people reacted when they saw me wearing such an obviously expensive piece. Men would look at him with envy, women would ask about the stone's provenance, and everyone understood that the Mannings had serious money. The necklace was a prop in Eric's performance of success. Just like our penthouse, our cars, and our memberships at exclusive clubs, our life together had been carefully orchestrated to project an image of perfection. Eric's medical practice occupied the top floor of a prestigious medical building on the Upper East Side, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the reservoir in Central Park. His office was decorated with awards, diplomas, and photographs of him with famous patients he had treated. The waiting room looked more like a luxury hotel lobby than a medical facility, with leather furniture, fresh orchids, and classical music playing softly in the background. We entertained frequently and lavishly. Our dinner parties were legendary. Among Eric's colleagues, with carefully planned menus designed by a professional chef, wines selected from our custom-built cellar, and guest lists that read like a who's who of New York society. I took pride in these events, seeing them as an investment in Eric's career and a way to maintain the social connections that had been important to my family for generations. The dinner parties followed a predictable pattern. Eric would greet guests with his characteristic charm, sharing amusing anecdotes from the hospital while careful never to breach patient confidentiality. I would circulate with practiced grace, asking about spouses and children, remembering details from previous conversations, ensuring everyone felt welcome and valued. We moved through these events like professional performers, each playing our role in the ongoing production of our successful marriage. Eric particularly enjoyed introducing me to new colleagues and clients. "This is my wife, Priscilla," he would say, his hand resting possessively on my lower back. "She's the brains of our operation. Harvard MBA, you know. I couldn't manage without her." The words were always the same, delivered with a smile that suggested he was being modest while actually highlighting his good fortune in marrying someone so accomplished. I had genuinely enjoyed these gatherings for years, finding satisfaction in supporting Eric's career and maintaining the social traditions my family had valued. But gradually, I began to notice subtle changes in how Eric presented our relationship. Instead of emphasizing my professional accomplishments, he started describing me as his better half who keeps him grounded. When people asked about my work on various charity boards, he would gently redirect the conversation to his latest surgical innovations or research projects. The shift was so gradual that I didn't recognize it as deliberate undermining. I thought Eric was simply becoming more confident in his own achievements and less dependent on my family's connections for validation. I was proud of his growing success and happy to step back from the spotlight if that's what made him comfortable. Our summers in the Hamptons followed the same carefully choreographed routine. We would spend long weekends at my family's estate from May through September, hosting pool parties for Eric's colleagues and their families. The house was perfect for entertaining, with expansive grounds that overlooked the ocean, a pool area designed for large gatherings, and enough bedrooms to accommodate overnight guests. Eric had initially been overwhelmed by the scale and elegance of the estate. The house had 12 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a formal dining room that seated 20, and a kitchen that could handle catering for events up to 100 people. The artwork was museum quality, collected by my grandmother over 40 years of careful acquisition. The gardens had been designed by the same landscape architect who worked on Central Park, and they required a full-time staff to maintain, but Eric adapted quickly to the lifestyle the house represented. He learned to sail our 40-foot yacht, joined the tennis club where he could play with other successful professionals, and cultivated friendships with our neighbors who included several Fortune 500 CEOs and a handful of celebrities who valued the privacy that East Hampton provided. During these summer weekends, Eric would often disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was networking at the yacht club or playing tennis with potential clients. I was happy he had found ways to enjoy himself and build professional relationships, so I never questioned these absences. I would spend the time reading on the beach, working in the garden, or having lunch with the other wives who summered in the area. What I didn't know was that Eric's disappearances had nothing to do with networking or tennis. He had discovered underground poker games that operated in some of the more exclusive private clubs in the area. These weren't casual Friday night games with modest stakes. They were serious affairs where successful men bet amounts that would be shocking to most people but were barely noticeable to those with substantial wealth. Eric had always enjoyed playing poker with his medical school friends, but these games were different. The stakes were higher, the players more sophisticated, and the adrenaline rush more intense than anything he had experienced in an operating room. He told himself that he could afford to lose a few $1,000s for the entertainment value, and when he won, the satisfaction was intoxicating. The wins reinforced Eric's belief that he was not only a skilled surgeon but also a gifted gambler, who could read people and calculate odds better than the average player. He started studying poker strategy during his downtime at the hospital, reading books and watching online tutorials to improve his game. He convinced himself that gambling was just another skill he could master through intelligence and discipline, but gambling addiction doesn't follow the same rules as medical expertise. The more Eric won in the beginning, the more confident he became, and the higher stakes he was willing to accept. When he started losing, he told himself it was just a temporary setback that could be corrected with better strategy and larger bets to recoup his losses. Meanwhile, I was completely oblivious to this growing obsession. Eric maintained his professional demeanor, continued to excel in his medical practice, and showed the same level of attention and affection in our marriage. If anything, he seemed more energetic and engaged during our summer weekends, which I attributed to the relaxation and recreation he was finally allowing himself after years of focusing exclusively on work. The trips to Atlantic City and Las Vegas began innocuously enough. Eric would mention a medical conference or continuing education seminar that required travel, and I would encourage him to extend the trip for a day or two of vacation if his schedule allowed. I was pleased that he was taking time for himself, and didn't think to question the details of his itinerary. Eric became masterful at creating believable cover stories for these gambling trips. He would research actual medical conferences taking place in the cities he wanted to visit, mention colleagues who would supposedly be attending, and even bring back conference materials and continuing education certificates that he obtained. From attending brief sessions before heading to the casinos, the most painful realization was how effortlessly Eric had compartmentalized his deception. At home, he was still the attentive husband who brought me coffee in bed every morning, who remembered to send flowers on the anniversary of my mother's death, who would hold me while we watched movies on Sunday afternoons. He maintained all the rituals and gestures that had made me fall in love with him, even while systematically stealing from me and planning his escape. The gambling addiction hadn't just corrupted Eric's relationship with money. It had fundamentally changed his relationship with truth. Every conversation became an opportunity to craft a more convincing narrative. Every affectionate gesture was calculated to maintain my trust. Every expression of love was designed to prevent me from looking too closely at his activities. But even master manipulators make mistakes eventually. And Eric's mistake was underestimating the woman who had loved him for 23 years, supported his career unconditionally, and shared every aspect of her life with him. He thought he knew me well enough to predict my reactions and responses. He was about to discover just how wrong he had been. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks before our anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin. I was sitting in my home office, reviewing the quarterly statements for our investment accounts, when I noticed an unusual withdrawal from our money market fund. $50,000 had been transferred to Eric's personal checking account, an account I rarely monitored because he used it primarily for his medical practice expenses and personal purchases. The withdrawal itself wasn't alarming. Eric often moved money between accounts for various reasons: equipment purchases for his practice, continuing education expenses, or investment opportunities he wanted to pursue independently. What caught my attention was the timing. The transfer had been made on a Friday afternoon, the same day Eric had left for what he described as a weekend cardiology conference in Boston. I pulled up the conference website on my computer, curious about the program that had required such short notice. The American College of Cardiology was indeed hosting a symposium that weekend, but when I clicked through to the agenda, I found something odd. The conference had been planned for months, with early registration deadlines and detailed scheduling. That suggested attendees would have known about it well in advance. Yet Eric had mentioned it to me only the day before he left, claiming a colleague had dropped out and offered him the registration spot. I told myself I was being paranoid, that successful people often made last-minute business decisions that involved significant money. Eric had built his practice through careful investment in the latest technology and continuing education. If he saw an opportunity to advance his career or learn about new procedures, it made sense that he would act quickly, but something about the situation nagged at me. Eric had been different lately, more distracted, more secretive about his schedule, more defensive when I asked casual questions about his day. When he returned from Boston that Sunday evening, he seemed energized in a way that didn't match someone who had spent a weekend in medical lectures and networking sessions. "How was the conference?" I asked as he unpacked his overnight bag. "Excellent," he replied without looking up. "Fascinating developments in minimally invasive valve repair. I made some good connections too." I waited for him to elaborate, as he usually did when discussing professional events. Eric loved sharing details about new procedures he'd learned, colleagues he'd met, and innovations that excited him about the future of cardiac surgery. But this time, he offered nothing more. "Did you get any materials I could read?" I asked. "You know I enjoy staying current with developments in your field." Eric paused for just a moment, a hesitation so brief I might have imagined it. "The presentations aren't available yet. They'll email them to attendees next week." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in his tone felt rehearsed. I made a mental note to ask about the materials again in a few days, though I suspected I would forget or be distracted by other concerns. 2 weeks later, another unusual transaction appeared on our statements. This time, it was a cash advance of $30,000 from Eric's credit card, a card with a credit limit I hadn't realized was so high. The advance had been taken on a Thursday afternoon, and Eric's calendar showed he had been in surgery during that time. I called the credit card company, identifying myself as the authorized user on the account. The customer service representative confirmed that the advance had been taken at an ATM in Atlantic City, New Jersey, at 3:47 p.m. on Thursday. When I asked about the location details, she provided an address that meant nothing to me at the time, but I wrote it down anyway. That evening, I casually mentioned to Eric that I had noticed some unusual credit card activity while reviewing our monthly statements. "What kind of activity?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "A large cash advance. $30,000. I was wondering if you had made a major purchase that required cash for some reason." Eric's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I had to pay a contractor who was doing some work at the office." He preferred cash for tax reasons. The explanation was plausible enough, but I found myself wondering why Eric hadn't mentioned this contractor or the office renovation that would require such a large cash payment. His practice had been running smoothly for years, and I couldn't think of any improvements or repairs that had been discussed. What kind of work? I asked. Updating the electrical system in the surgery suite. New regulations require additional safety measures. Again, the answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Eric had always been good at thinking on his feet, a skill that served him well in emergency situations at the hospital, but this felt different. It felt like he had prepared responses for questions he anticipated I might ask over the next few days. I found myself paying closer attention to Eric's behavior and schedule. I noticed that he was receiving more text messages than usual, and he had developed a habit of checking his phone immediately when he thought I wasn't looking. When his phone rang during dinner, he would glance at the caller ID and often decline the call without explanation. The subtle changes in his routine became more apparent once I started looking for them. He was staying later at the hospital more frequently, claiming he had complicated cases that required additional preparation. He had become less interested in our usual weekend activities, suggesting we skip the dinners with friends or cultural events we had traditionally enjoyed together most. Unsettling was the change in how he talked about money. Eric had always been confident about our financial security, often encouraging me to make charitable donations or purchase art for our collection without worrying about the cost. But recently, he had become more cautious, questioning expenses that would never have concerned him before. Do we really need to spend $15,000 on that charity auction? He asked when I mentioned bidding on a painting to benefit the Children's Hospital where he had served on the board for years. It's for a good cause, I replied, surprised by his reluctance. And you know how important it is to maintain our visibility in the philanthropic community. I just think we should be more strategic about our charitable giving, he said. Maybe focus on fewer organizations but make larger commitments. The conversation was reasonable on the surface, but it represented a fundamental shift in Eric's attitude toward spending, and toward the charitable commitments that had always been important to both of us. The turning point came when I decided to investigate the address where Eric's credit card advance had been taken. A simple internet search revealed that the ATM was located in the lobby of the Borgata Hotel Casino and Spa in Atlantic City. The same weekend Eric had supposedly been at a medical conference in Boston, he had actually been 3 hours south, taking out $30,000 in cash at a casino. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen, feeling the foundation of my trust in Eric crumble. The man I had loved and supported for 23 years had lied to me directly and convincingly. Not just a small lie to avoid conflict, but an elaborate deception that involved fake conferences, fabricated contractors, and secret trips to casinos. The question that haunted me was how long this had been going on, and what else Eric had hidden from me. If he could lie so easily about a weekend trip, what other aspects of his life had become fiction? How much money had he spent? What other secrets was he keeping? For the first time in our marriage, I realized I didn't know my husband at all. The morning I discovered my mother's necklace was missing will forever be etched in my memory with perfect, devastating clarity. It was a Saturday in early November, exactly 2 weeks before our anniversary dinner. I had been preparing for the annual Met Gala preview, an exclusive event where major donors got an advance look at the museum's upcoming exhibitions. The necklace was always my choice for such occasions. It represented my family's long-standing commitment to the arts and gave me confidence in rooms full of New York's cultural elite. I entered my walk-in closet and approached the custom-built jewelry safe that occupied an entire wall. The safe had been installed by my mother years ago, with individual compartments for each significant piece in our family's collection. The necklace lived in the center compartment, in a custom-fitted velvet box that had protected it for over a century. The compartment was empty. For a moment, I simply stared at the vacant space, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The velvet box was gone entirely, not just the necklace. I opened every other compartment in the safe, thinking perhaps I had moved it and forgotten. My grandmother's pearls were in their proper place, as were my mother's diamond earrings and the Art Deco bracelet I had inherited from my great-aunt. Only the necklace was missing. I checked my jewelry box on the dresser, the small safe in our bedroom where I kept everyday pieces, and even the jewelry travel case I used for trips. Nothing. The necklace had simply vanished, along with its protective box and the small card my mother had written describing its history. My first instinct was to call the police. Someone had broken into our home and stolen the most valuable piece in my collection while leaving everything else untouched. It seemed impossible. Our building had excellent security, and our penthouse required a private elevator key to access, but no other explanation made sense. Eric, I called, finding him in his study reading medical journals. The emerald necklace. is missing from my safe. He looked up from his reading, his expression shifting immediately to concern. Missing? Are you sure? I've checked everywhere. The entire box is gone. Someone broke into our home and took it. Eric stood up quickly, moving to embrace me. Oh, darling, I'm so sorry. That necklace meant everything to you. We should call the police immediately. His reaction seemed genuine, filled with the appropriate mix of shock and sympathy. He held me while I cried, stroking my hair and murmuring reassurances that we would find the thieves and recover the necklace. He suggested we check all the windows and doors for signs of forced entry, and he was the one who insisted we contact our insurance company immediately to report the theft. We spent the morning with 2 detectives from the NYPD, filing a detailed report and answering questions about our building's security, our household staff, and recent visitors to our home. Eric was helpful and thorough, providing details about the necklace's value and offering to contact his own connections in law enforcement if needed. The detectives were professional but not particularly optimistic. High-end jewelry theft in Manhattan was common, they explained, and the thieves usually had the pieces broken down and sold within hours. The emeralds and diamonds would be removed from their settings and sold separately, making recovery virtually impossible over the next few days. Eric was wonderfully supportive. He called our insurance agent to expedite the claim process, contacted a security consultant about upgrading our home alarm system, and even suggested we hire a private investigator to supplement the police investigation. He seemed as devastated by the loss as I was, often commenting on how beautiful I had looked wearing the necklace and how much he knew it meant to me, but something about his behavior didn't feel quite right. Eric was being supportive in all the ways I would have expected, but there was an artificial quality to his concern that I couldn't identify at first. He was saying all the right things, making all the right gestures, but it felt slightly performed rather than spontaneous. The realization came to me on Tuesday morning when I overheard Eric on the phone with our insurance agent. I was walking past his study when I heard him asking detailed questions about the claims process, specifically about how the payout would be structured and whether we could receive the money in a lump sum rather than having it applied toward a replacement piece. The sentimental value can't be replaced, I heard him saying, so Priscilla would prefer to have the cash settlement rather than shopping for something new. I stopped in the hallway, confused. We had never discussed what we would do with any insurance money, and Eric certainly didn't know my preferences about replacement jewelry. I had been too devastated by the loss to even think about insurance settlements or new purchases. When Eric finished his call, I entered his study. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with the insurance agent. What did he say about the claim? Good news, Eric replied, his tone upbeat. The necklace was fully covered, and we should receive the settlement within a few weeks. $85,000. I never told you I wanted cash instead of a replacement, I said carefully. How did you know that's what I would prefer? Eric's smile faltered for just an instant. I just assumed, given how special that particular piece was to you. Nothing could replace your mother's necklace, so I thought you'd rather have the money to donate to charity or invest. It was a reasonable assumption, but something about the way he had expressed my supposed preferences to the insurance agent bothered me. He had spoken with such certainty about what I wanted, as if we had discussed it extensively. That evening, I decided to call our insurance agent myself. Peter Hartman had been handling our family's insurance needs for over 15 years, and I wanted to understand the claims process better. Mrs. Manning, Peter said when I reached him, I was just speaking with your husband about the necklace claim. Such a terrible loss. Eric mentioned you were quite specific about wanting the cash settlement. Actually, Peter, we haven't really discussed what we'd prefer to do yet. I'm still processing the loss. There was a brief pause on the line. Oh, I see. Eric seemed quite certain about your wishes. He also asked about expediting the payment process, mentioning that you were considering making a large charitable donation and wanted to finalize that before the end of the tax year. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had no plans for any large charitable donations, and Eric knew I typically plan such gifts months in advance after careful consideration of our financial situation. Did Eric mention anything else about our plans for the money? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He asked about having the check made out to him specifically, since he handles most of your financial transactions. I told him we'd need both signatures for a claim this large, but he said you'd probably prefer not to be bothered with the paperwork. After I hung up with Peter, I sat in my study for a long time, pieces of a disturbing puzzle beginning to form in my mind. Eric's immediate focus on the insurance money, his assumptions about my preferences, his desire to handle the settlement personally, none of it felt like the response of a grieving husband concerned about his wife's emotional state. For the first time since the necklace disappeared, I began to wonder if someone close to me had taken it, the thought was so painful and disloyal that I tried to push it away, but once it entered my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about the inconsistencies in Eric's behavior. His perfect responses to the police questions, his detailed knowledge of our insurance coverage, his eagerness to expedite the claim process. What if it wasn't supportive behavior but guilty knowledge? I decided I needed to know more about our insurance policy and exactly what Eric had been telling Peter Hartman. But more importantly, I needed to understand why my husband seemed more interested in the financial aspects of our loss than in supporting his wife through the trauma of having her most precious possession stolen. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to hire my own investigator, someone who could look into the theft with fresh eyes and no preconceptions about who might be responsible. I had no idea that this decision would lead me to discoveries far more devastating than a missing necklace. Finding the right private investigator required discretion I'd never needed before. I couldn't ask friends for recommendations without revealing my suspicions about Eric. After hours of research, Catherine Morrison's name appeared consistently on best of lists for Manhattan investigators. Former FBI, white-collar crime specialist, Fortune 500 clientele, exactly what I needed. I scheduled a consultation using my maiden name, describing only a sensitive family matter. Catherine's Midtown office was elegant but understated, her walls displaying law enforcement commendations alongside Georgetown and Columbia degrees. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said, "tell me about your situation." Sitting across from this sharp-eyed professional, I struggled to voice my suspicions. Accusing your husband of theft felt like crossing an irreversible line. "I think my husband may have stolen something valuable from me," I said finally. "I need to know for certain before deciding what to do." Catherine made notes as I explained the missing necklace, Eric's focus on insurance settlements, and the financial discrepancies I discovered. When I mentioned the $85,000 value and Eric's possible gambling problem, her expression sharpened. "Mrs. Montgomery, jewelry theft might be just the beginning. If your husband has a serious gambling addiction and he's willing to steal a family heirloom, there are likely other financial irregularities you haven't discovered yet." The possibility chilled me. If Eric had stolen my necklace, what else had he taken? A full investigation would include financial analysis of all accounts your husband can access, surveillance to document his activities, and recovery of the stolen item if possible, Catherine explained. "But I should warn you, investigations like this rarely uncover just one problem." I thought about our 23-year marriage, our social standing, the future I'd imagined. An investigation could destroy everything, regardless of what Catherine found. "If I don't hire you and I'm right about what Eric has done, what happens then? He continues stealing until there's nothing left. Gambling addiction doesn't improve on its own, it escalates until the addict destroys everything around them." I signed Catherine's $25,000 retainer that afternoon. It was more money than I'd ever spent without Eric's knowledge, but the truth was worth any price. Catherine's first assignment: gather financial documents without arousing suspicion. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment summaries, anything showing unusual spending patterns. She also wanted me to document Eric's daily routine while maintaining complete normalcy. "The most important thing is that you continue behaving normally," Catherine emphasized. "If Eric realizes you're investigating, he'll either hide his activities better or escalate his theft to grab whatever he can before you stop him." Over the next week, I became a spy in my own home. I photographed documents when Eric was at the hospital, noted mysterious phone calls, and discovered things I'd previously ignored: a credit card I didn't know about, mail delivered to a post office box he'd never mentioned, a second cell phone hidden in his gym bag. The burner phone convinced me Catherine was right. The cryptic messages, "Table 6 tonight, usual stakes, wire transfer confirmed," painted a picture of systematic deception. When Catherine called for our first update, I had gathered a folder of evidence documenting a man living a secret life parallel to our marriage. My transformation from trusting wife to investigator was complete, and there was no turning back. Catherine's call came exactly 1 week after she'd begun investigating. Her voice carried an ominous gravity that prepared me for devastating news. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need to see you today. I found everything, and it's much worse than we anticipated." At Catherine's office, documents spread across her conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. She opened the first folder, revealing bank statements from accounts I'd never seen. "Eric has maintained secret accounts for over 2 years," she explained. "These show systematic transfers from your joint accounts, always amounts small enough to avoid triggering bank alerts." I stared at the methodical theft: 5,000 here, 3,000 there, occasionally 10,000 when Eric felt confident. The pattern was deliberate and calculating. "How much total?" I whispered. From joint accounts alone, approximately $320,000 over 18 months. The number staggered me. But Catherine wasn't finished. Eric has also been forging your signature to access your personal trust funds. She showed me loan applications and investment withdrawals bearing my forged signature. He's gotten better at copying your signature over time, he's been practicing. The thought of Eric rehearsing my signature to steal more effectively made me physically ill. The surveillance team has been following Eric, Catherine continued, opening another folder of photographs. He's not just gambling recreationally, he's involved with dangerous people. The photos showed Eric with men in expensive suits, handling cash envelopes, meeting in parking garages and hotel lobbies. His body language screamed desperation and fear. Professional gamblers. Loan sharks. High-stakes private games where the minimum bet is $50,000, Catherine explained. Your husband owes money to very dangerous individuals. She showed me photos of Antonia Russo, but these revealed she wasn't just Eric's romantic interest. Antonia works for people who target wealthy individuals with gambling problems. She's what they call a cooler, someone who befriends high-net-worth gamblers and leads them into games where the house always wins. Catherine opened the final folder, IOUs in Eric's handwriting for amounts that defied belief. Gambling debts totaling over $400,000 to people whose methods of collection didn't involve legal systems. We found your necklace, Catherine said, handing me a photograph of my family heirloom on a pawn shop counter. Eastside Jewelry and Loans on 2nd Avenue. Eric pawned it for $8,000, 1/10 of its actual value. Seeing my mother's necklace reduced to pawn shop merchandise broke something inside me. Mrs. Montgomery, Eric's gambling debts aren't just financial problems, they're safety issues. These people won't hesitate to target you if they can't collect from him. Catherine leaned forward. Eric's behavior suggests he's planning something larger. The escalation in theft, attempts to access your trust funds, pressure from creditors. I think he's preparing an exit strategy. What kind of exit strategy? Divorce with claims on your assets to pay his debts. Or worse, something that would give him access to your life insurance policy. The suggestion hung in the air, too terrible to process fully. Catherine was implying that my husband might be planning something beyond theft and betrayal, looking at evidence spread across the table, bank statements, surveillance photos, forged documents. I saw my marriage reduced to proof of systematic criminal behavior. I want to confront him, I said. But not privately. I want him to face consequences in front of people whose opinions matter to him. Catherine nodded. That can be arranged. But once we do this, there's no going back. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother's necklace in a pawn shop, about dangerous criminals who knew where we lived, about Eric researching my death for insurance money. Yes, I said. I'm ready. 3 days later, Catherine's phone call shattered any remaining illusions about my marriage. I was reviewing legal documents when she called, her voice carrying unprecedented alarm. Mrs. Montgomery, Eric just attempted to liquidate your personal trust fund. The entire account. $12 million. The number didn't register immediately. $12 million was more than Eric could possibly need for gambling debts, it was enough to disappear forever. Did he succeed? The bank stopped the transaction due to paperwork irregularities. Eric had forged your signature on withdrawal forms and provided fake identification claiming financial power of attorney. Catherine paused. This wasn't desperate debt payment, this was systematic theft of your entire inheritance. She showed me bank security footage of Eric looking perfectly calm and professional, executing what appeared to be a carefully planned operation, not a desperate gamble. While you've focused on gambling debts and the necklace, Eric has been much busier, Catherine continued, pulling up email exchanges between Eric and a divorce attorney, detailed planning sessions ongoing for 4 months. Eric's lawyer advised establishing a pattern of financial contribution to your lifestyle before filing for divorce. That's why he's been more involved in household expenses lately. I remembered Eric's recent interest in our charitable giving and investment strategies. I'd thought he was being more responsible. Instead, he was building a legal case to claim half my assets, but the worst revelation came next, emails between Eric and Antonia discussing the exit strategy. They'd been planning to leave the country together, moving money to offshore accounts and researching countries without extradition treaties. The plan was breathtakingly cruel: liquidate my trust fund, file for divorce claiming my reckless spending caused financial distress, then disappear to South America before legal proceedings concluded. His gambling debts would become my responsibility while he lived comfortably on my family's money. When were they planning to leave? I asked. Next week. Right after your anniversary dinner. The timing was perfect cruelty. Eric planned to celebrate 23 years of marriage while knowing he'd abandon me within days. There's something else, Catherine said, showing me Eric's browser history, searches about life insurance payouts, accidental death benefits, and legal requirements for collecting policies when the beneficiary is out of the country. She turned the laptop toward me, displaying a bookmarked webpage about making accidental deaths appear natural. Eric has been researching ways to kill you for insurance money, Catherine said bluntly. This isn't about gambling debts anymore, this is something much more dangerous. The room spun as I processed her words. Eric hadn't just been stealing or planning to leave me, he'd been researching murder while pretending to love me. We need to contact police immediately, Catherine said. No, I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. Not yet. Mrs. Montgomery, your husband may be planning to kill you. This isn't about revenge, this is survival. I looked at the evidence one more time: systematic theft, forged signatures, offshore accounts, research into my death. 23 years of marriage had been nothing but an elaborate confidence game. I want to give him exactly what he's planning, I said. Let him think everything is proceeding according to his plan. Let him believe he's about to get away with all of it. That's incredibly dangerous. So is letting him disappear with $12 million without facing consequences. I stood up, feeling cold clarity settle over me. Eric wants one final performance as the loving husband? I'll give him an audience he'll never forget. Catherine nodded slowly. If you're determined to confront him publicly, we need to ensure your safety and prevent him from accessing more money. I thought about Le Bernardin, about Eric's anticipated farewell performance. Catherine, I want you to arrange special guests at our anniversary dinner. People whose opinions matter to Eric's career and reputation. I want witnesses when I show him exactly what I know and what it's going to cost him. Catherine agreed. But once we do this, Eric's life as he knows it will be over. Everything will be destroyed. I thought about my mother's necklace, about $12 million Eric tried to steal, about his research into killing me. Good, I said. That's exactly what I want. The next 72 hours became the most intense of my life. Catherine transformed from investigator to strategic coordinator, assembling a team to orchestrate what she called the most comprehensive takedown of a white-collar criminal she'd ever attempted. Our first meeting included Catherine, myself, and Robin Caldwell, Manhattan's most feared divorce attorney, known for destroying wealthy men who tried cheating their wives. Mrs. Manning, Robin said, reviewing Catherine's evidence, your husband has made critical mistakes that work entirely in our favor. The forged signatures constitute multiple felonies, and the attempted trust fund theft gives us grounds for emergency asset protection that no criminal attorney can challenge. We mapped out a legal strategy leaving Eric with nothing. Every joint account would be frozen, every shared asset protected, his access to our properties revoked the moment divorce papers were filed. Timing is crucial, Robin explained. We file everything simultaneously: divorce papers, criminal complaints, asset protection orders, restraining orders. If Eric gets advance warning of any element, he'll hide money or disappear. But legal strategy was only part of our plan. Catherine worked on public accountability, ensuring Eric's professional and social reputation would be destroyed as thoroughly as his finances. Your husband's medical license is regulated by the New York State Department of Health, Catherine explained. They have strict guidelines about physicians engaging in criminal behavior. Once charges are filed, his license will be automatically suspended. Catherine had contacted Mount Sinai's legal department. Hospital administrators wouldn't tolerate physicians bringing negative publicity to their institution. The moment this became public, Eric would be terminated, social destruction would be equally thorough. Catherine compiled lists of every organization Eric belonged to, every board he served on, every club where he maintained membership. All would receive detailed information about his criminal activities. The centerpiece remained our anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, where Eric would learn his exit strategy had been discovered and defeated. The guest list is critical, Catherine emphasized. We need people whose presence maximizes Eric's humiliation while ensuring your safety. We chose 12 witnesses: Dr. Peter Hawthorne representing Eric's professional world, Hospital Board President Margaret Foster, our Hamptons friends James and Catherine Bradford, and most importantly, Detective Anthony Costa from NYPD's White Collar Crime Division. We're treating this as a controlled sting operation, Detective Costa explained. Mrs. Manning will wear a wire, and plainclothes officers will be positioned throughout the restaurant. Your husband won't be able to hurt you or escape. Catherine arranged for my mother's necklace to be recovered that afternoon. She wanted Eric to see me wearing it, understanding I'd retrieved what he'd stolen and was prepared to take back everything else. Perhaps the most satisfying element involved Antonia Russo. Catherine discovered she was wanted on fraud charges in 3 states, operating under multiple identities to target wealthy men with gambling addictions. "We'll let Eric believe his escape plan is viable," Catherine explained. "He'll think he can leave the country with Antonia after your dinner. Instead, he'll be arrested at the restaurant while she's picked up by federal agents at their meeting point." The coordination was staggering. Robin prepared legal documents for simultaneous filing in 4 courts. Catherine ensured evidence was properly documented and admissible. Detective Costa coordinated with multiple agencies for both arrests. "Mrs. Manning," Robin said during our final session, "what we're planning will destroy your husband's life completely and permanently. His career will end, he'll face years in prison, and he'll never recover financially or socially." I thought about 23 years supporting Eric's career, sharing my family's wealth, loving him despite his flaws, and how he'd systematically betrayed that trust. Eric was planning to steal $12 million, abandon me with gambling debts to dangerous criminals, and possibly kill me for insurance money. What we're planning isn't revenge, it's justice. Tomorrow night, Eric would learn what it felt like to be caught off guard, facing devastating consequences, watching his life crumble before an audience. And I would finally show my husband exactly who he'd been stealing from all along. The morning of our anniversary dinner, I woke up feeling like an actress preparing for the most important performance of her life. Eric was already in the shower, humming softly, a habit he had when he was particularly pleased about something. As I listened to him singing old jazz standards, I realized he was probably anticipating his escape with Antonia, believing this would be his last morning in our penthouse before beginning his new life with my family's money. I lay in bed for a few extra minutes, studying our bedroom with fresh eyes. The custom-built furniture, the original Picasso sketches on the walls, the view of Central Park that had cost us $8 million, all of it would be Eric's memory within hours. By tomorrow morning, he would be in a jail cell, and I would begin the process of rebuilding my life without him. "Good morning, darling," Eric said as he emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair dry. "I've been looking forward to tonight all week. 23 years of marriage deserves a proper celebration." The casual way he lied to my face, even now, was breathtaking. I managed to smile and kiss his cheek, playing my role as the trusting wife one final time. "I'm excited too," I replied. "I have a few surprises planned for tonight." Eric's eyes lit up with what he probably thought was anticipation but looked more like greed to me now. "Surprises? You know how much I love your surprises." He had no idea how true that statement was about to become. After Eric left for the hospital, I spent the morning making final preparations with Catherine. She arrived at my penthouse at 10 o'clock with a team of technicians who would wire me for the evening's confrontation. The recording equipment was so sophisticated that it looked like something from a spy movie, a tiny microphone that would be completely invisible beneath my dress, connected to a transmitter smaller than a credit card. "The sound quality will be perfect," Catherine assured me as the technicians ran their final tests. "Every word Eric says will be recorded and admissible in court. More importantly, Detective Costa and his team will hear everything in real time, so they can intervene immediately if the situation becomes dangerous." We reviewed the timeline one more time. I would arrive at Le Bernardin at 7:30 minutes before Eric, giving Catherine's team time to ensure all our special guests were properly positioned. Eric would be completely unaware that half the diners in the restaurant were there specifically to witness his downfall. "The key is maintaining your composure until the moment you're ready to reveal everything," Catherine reminded me. "Eric will be expecting a normal anniversary dinner. Let him order wine, let him toast your marriage, let him perform his loving husband act one final time. When you're ready to begin, simply touch your necklace, that's the signal for Detective Costa to move closer." At 2 o'clock, I went to the pawn shop to retrieve my mother's necklace. Eastside Jewelry and Loans was exactly as depressing as I had imagined: barred windows, fluorescent lighting, and an owner who looked like he had never seen a legitimate transaction in his life. But Catherine's legal team had prepared all the necessary paperwork, and within minutes, I was holding my family's heirloom again. The emeralds seemed to glow more brilliantly than I remembered, as if they had absorbed some of my anger and were ready to help me reclaim what had been stolen. I fastened the clasp around my neck in the pawn shop's grimy bathroom, feeling my mother's presence more strongly than I had since her death. "You're going to help me finish this," I whispered to her memory back at the penthouse. I spent an hour getting ready with unusual care. The dress I had chosen was midnight blue silk, elegant but not flashy, sophisticated but authoritative. I wanted to look like the kind of woman who could destroy a man's life with calm precision, not someone driven by emotion or revenge. At 6 o'clock, Robin Caldwell called with final confirmation that all legal documents were prepared and ready for filing. The moment Detective Costa places Eric under arrest, we'll file everything simultaneously, she explained. Divorce papers, asset freezes, criminal complaints, and restraining orders. By midnight tonight, Eric won't have access to a single dollar of your money. Catherine arrived at 6:30 to escort me to the restaurant and provide final moral support. She looked me over with the critical eye of a professional who had seen dozens of confrontations go wrong. You look perfect, she said. Calm, confident, in control. Remember, you hold all the power tonight. Eric's life is about to end as he knows it, and he has no idea what's coming. As we rode in Catherine's car toward Le Bernardin, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For weeks, I had been discovering new betrayals, learning about additional crimes, realizing that my entire marriage had been built on lies. The anger and hurt had been overwhelming at times, threatening to consume me with rage, but now, on the evening of Eric's reckoning, I felt something much more powerful than anger. I felt the cold satisfaction of justice finally being served. Eric had spent 2 years systematically stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to destroy my life. Tonight, he would learn that actions have consequences, and those consequences would be far more devastating than anything he had done to me. We arrived at Le Bernardin at 7:25. Catherine walked me to the door, squeezing my hand once before letting me enter alone. Break a leg, she whispered. The restaurant was already filled with our carefully planted guests, though Eric wouldn't recognize most of them as anything other than typical Manhattan diners. Dr. Peter Hawthorne was seated at a table near the bar, reading a medical journal. Detective Costa was enjoying what appeared to be a business dinner with his partner, both of them positioned with clear sight lines to our anniversary table. Marcel, our regular server, greeted me with his usual warmth, completely unaware that he was about to witness the most dramatic dinner service of his career. Mrs. Manning, how lovely to see you. Mr. Manning isn't here yet. He'll be along shortly, I replied, touching my necklace unconsciously. I think tonight is going to be very memorable. I was seated at our usual table, the same one where Eric and I had celebrated so many milestones over the years. Our first anniversary dinner, his promotion to chief of surgery, my mother's memorial service reception. So many memories had been created in this room, and tonight would add one more, the night our marriage finally ended in truth instead of lies. At exactly 8 o'clock. I saw Eric approaching through the restaurant's main entrance. He was wearing his best suit, carrying a small gift box that probably contained some meaningless jewelry he had charged to our joint credit card. His smile was radiant as he spotted me, and he moved through the restaurant with the confident stride of a man who believed he was about to get away with the perfect crime. Darling, he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. You look absolutely stunning tonight. His eyes lingered on my necklace, and I watched his expression carefully for any sign of recognition or surprise. But Eric's poker face was perfect. If I hadn't known he was the one who pawned it, I would never have suspected anything from his reaction. Thank you, I replied, smiling back at him. I thought our anniversary deserved something special. Eric took his seat across from me, placing the gift box on the table between us. 23 years of marriage, he said, reaching for my hand. I feel like the luckiest man in the world. Looking at him across the table, still playing the role of devoted husband even now, I felt the last traces of love I had harbored for him finally disappear. This man had stolen from me, lied to me, and planned to abandon me to face his criminal debts alone. He had researched ways to kill me for insurance money while pretending to love me, but his luck was about to run out. Eric, I said, touching my necklace to signal Detective Costa, we need to talk. Eric's expression shifted slightly at my words, but he maintained his anniversary dinner smile. Of course, darling. What's on your mind? You seem a little tense tonight. I could see him trying to read my mood, probably wondering if I had discovered something or if this was just typical anniversary nervousness. He had no way of knowing that I had spent weeks planning this moment, that every word I was about to speak had been carefully rehearsed, that the very restaurant around us had been transformed into a trap designed specifically for him. I've been thinking about our marriage, I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. 23 years is a long time. Long enough to really know someone. It certainly is, Eric agreed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. And I feel like I fall in love with you all over again every day. The ease with which he lied was remarkable. Even now, knowing that he was planning to leave me within days, he could perform the role of devoted husband with complete conviction. I wondered how many times over the years he had said words he didn't mean, made promises he had no intention of keeping. Marcel appeared at our table with the wine list, and Eric made a show of selecting an expensive vintage, a 2010 Burgundy that cost more than most people made in a week. He was generous with money that wasn't really his, I realized. Everything we had built together had been funded primarily by my family's wealth, yet Eric had never shown any hesitation about spending it. To 23 wonderful years, Eric said when Marcel returned with the wine, and to many more to come. We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip while studying Eric's face over the rim. He looked relaxed, confident, even happy. There was no trace of guilt or anxiety about what he had done or what he was planning to do. He was either a sociopath, incapable of feeling remorse, or he had become so skilled at compartmentalizing his deception that he could genuinely enjoy our anniversary dinner while planning my destruction. Eric, I said, setting down my wine glass, I have something I want to discuss with you before we order dinner. Of course. What is it? I reached into my purse and withdrew a single photograph, one of the surveillance images Catherine had taken of Eric entering the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City. I placed it face down on the table between us, not revealing it yet. I've been doing some thinking about trust in our marriage, I continued. About honesty, communication, sharing our lives completely with each other. Eric nodded earnestly. Those are the foundations of any strong relationship. We've always been honest with each other, Priscilla. That's one of the things I'm most proud of about our marriage. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of the statement. Eric had just claimed that honesty was the foundation of our relationship while sitting across from a woman he had stolen from, lied to, and planned to abandon. The gap between his words and his actions was so vast it was almost impressive. I'm glad you feel that way, I said, because I have a confession to make. For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of concern cross Eric's features. A confession? I've been keeping something from you, and I don't think that's fair. In a marriage built on honesty, we shouldn't have secrets from each other. Eric's hand tightened slightly around his wine glass. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what I might know or suspect. His medical training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but I could see the first signs of stress beginning to show. What kind of secret? He asked carefully. The kind that involves trust and financial transparency, I replied, still not revealing the photograph. The kind that makes me wonder if I really know my husband as well as I thought I did. The restaurant's ambient noise, conversations, clinking silverware, the soft jazz playing in the background, seemed to fade as Eric focused entirely on my words. I could see him running through possibilities in his mind, trying to determine how much I might know and how he should respond. Priscilla, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but you're starting to worry me. Have I done something to upset you? The concerned husband act was flawless. His voice carried just the right note of confusion and worry, as if he were genuinely puzzled by my behavior. If I hadn't seen the evidence of his crimes with my own eyes, I might have believed him. I've been wondering about your travel schedule lately, I continued. All those medical conferences, continuing education seminars, research symposiums. You've been working so hard to stay current in your field. Well, yes, of course. Cardiac surgery is constantly evolving. If I don't stay up to date with the latest techniques and research, I can't provide the best care for my patients. That's what I admire about you, Eric. Your dedication to excellence, your commitment to your profession. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. I could see him relaxing slightly, thinking perhaps that this conversation was headed toward appreciation rather than confrontation. He had no way of knowing that I was simply setting the stage for what was to come. Do you remember the conference you attended in Boston 3 weeks ago? I asked. The American College of Cardiology Symposium on Minimally Invasive Valve Repair? Of course. It was fascinating. Some real breakthroughs in surgical technique. I'm sure it was. I was actually curious about the presentations, since you seemed so excited about what you'd learned. Did you manage to get copies of the research papers they discussed? Eric paused for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that someone who hadn't been watching for it would have missed it entirely. Not all of them. Some of the research is still preliminary, not ready for publication yet. That's too bad. I was hoping to read about those new techniques you mentioned. I turned over the photograph and slid it across the table toward him. Eric's eyes fixed on the image, himself entering the Borgata Casino, time-stamped during the exact weekend he claimed to be at a medical conference in Boston. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His hand moved instinctively toward the photograph, perhaps to hide it or push it away, but then stopped as he realized that would only confirm his guilt. Priscilla, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I can explain. I hope so, I replied, my voice still perfectly calm. Because I have several more photographs just like this one. And bank records. And credit card statements. And quite a lot of other evidence that suggests you haven't been entirely honest with me about how you spend your time. Eric glanced around the restaurant, probably looking for an escape route or hoping no one else could see the photograph. What he didn't realize was that several of the diners around us were watching our conversation very carefully, waiting for their cue to act. This isn't what it looks like, he said, making one last attempt at denial. Really? I asked, reaching into my purse again. Because I have 47 more photographs that look exactly like this. Should I show them to you? Or would you prefer to tell me the truth for once in our marriage? Eric's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. The confident, charming cardiologist was being replaced by a desperate man who had just realized his lies were about to destroy his life, but I wasn't finished yet. We hadn't even gotten to the stolen money, the forged signatures, or the plan to disappear with Antonia. Eric thought the gambling photos were the worst I had discovered, that he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Eric's attempt at damage control was pathetic to watch. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a confidential whisper, unaware that every word was being recorded and transmitted to Detective Costa's team. Priscilla, please, let me explain. Yes, I've been gambling, but it's not what you think. It started as stress relief from work, just small games with colleagues. It got a little out of hand, but I've been getting help. Help? I repeated, my voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear. What kind of help, Eric? I've been seeing a counselor. Dr. Matthews at the hospital recommended someone who specializes in addiction issues. I didn't want to worry you while I was getting my life back on track. The lies flowed so easily from his mouth that I wondered if he actually believed them himself. Dr. Matthews didn't exist, I had checked. There was no counselor, no treatment program, no attempt at recovery. There was only Antonia Russo and their plan to disappear with my money. That's interesting, I said, pulling out my phone. Because I called every addiction counselor in Manhattan, and none of them have any record of treating an Eric Manning. Eric's eyes widened slightly. He was beginning to realize that this wasn't a casual discovery, that I hadn't just stumbled across evidence of his gambling by accident. This was a systematic investigation, and I had been planning this confrontation for weeks. You investigated me? He asked, his voice carrying a note of injured disbelief that would have been convincing if I didn't know what he had done. I investigated my husband who had been lying to me, I corrected. The husband who told me he was at medical conferences, while he was actually losing our money in Atlantic City casinos. I could see other diners beginning to pay attention to our conversation. The couple at the table next to us had stopped talking and were listening with obvious interest. Marcel, our server, was hovering nearby, probably unsure whether he should intervene in what was clearly becoming a domestic dispute. How much, Eric? I asked, my voice now loud enough to carry across half the restaurant. How much of our money have you gambled away? It's not that much, Eric said desperately. Maybe $30,000 or $40,000 over the past year. I know it sounds like a lot, but compared to our income, 30 or 40,000? I interrupted, pulling out a folder from my purse. Eric, I have bank statements showing over $300,000 in unauthorized withdrawals from our joint accounts. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I could hear gasps from nearby tables, and I saw Marcel's eyes widen in shock. $300,000 was more money than most of the restaurant staff would see in a lifetime. Eric's face went from pale to gray. Priscilla, please, can we discuss this privately? People are staring. People are staring because you've been stealing from your wife for 2 years, I said, my voice now carrying to every corner of the restaurant. People are staring because you pawned my mother's necklace, the one I'm wearing right now, to feed your gambling addiction. I touched the emerald and diamond necklace at my throat, and Eric's eyes followed the gesture. For the first time, I saw recognition and genuine fear in his expression. He hadn't expected me to recover the necklace, hadn't planned for me to be wearing physical evidence of his theft during our anniversary dinner. You got it back, he whispered. I got it back from the pawn shop where you sold it for $8,000, I said. 1/10 of its actual value. You sold 4 generations of my family's heritage for gambling money. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen to the drama unfolding in their dining room. Dr. Peter Hawthorne, Eric's chief of cardiology, was staring at our table with an expression of horrified fascination. Eric, I continued, standing up so that everyone in the restaurant could see me clearly, I want you to explain to everyone here, your colleagues, your friends, these lovely people who are trying to enjoy their dinner, exactly what you did with my mother's necklace. Eric remained seated, his shoulders hunched as if he could make himself invisible. Priscilla, please sit down. We can work this out privately. No, Eric. We're going to work this out right here, right now, in front of everyone. Because theft isn't a private matter. Forgery isn't a private matter. And what you've done to our marriage isn't going to be swept under the rug anymore. I opened the folder I had been carrying and began spreading documents across our table like a prosecutor, presenting evidence to a jury. Bank statements, credit card bills, casino surveillance photos, forged signature comparisons, every piece of Eric's deception laid out for the entire restaurant to see. Let's start with the basics, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silent restaurant. Eric has been forging my signature to access accounts he had no legal right to touch. I held up two documents side by side, a legitimate signature from our mortgage paperwork and one of Eric's forgeries from a recent loan application. Even from several tables away, the differences were obvious to anyone looking. This is my actual signature, I announced, pointing to the first document. And this is Eric's attempt to steal $40,000 from my personal trust fund by pretending to be me. Eric finally stood up, desperation overriding his paralysis. Priscilla, you're having some kind of breakdown. These accusations are insane. I would never forge your signature. Would you like to see the other 17 examples? I asked, pulling out another stack of papers. Or should we move on to the part where you tried to liquidate my entire $12 million inheritance? The collective gasp from the restaurant was audible. $12 million was beyond most people's comprehension, and the idea that someone would steal that amount from their own spouse was shocking even to Manhattan's wealthy elite. Dr. Peter Hawthorne stood up from his table near the bar, his face a mask of professional concern. Eric, perhaps you should sit down and try to explain this situation calmly. Peter, thank God you're here, Eric said, turning toward his colleague with obvious relief. Priscilla is having some kind of episode. These documents are obviously fabricated. I would never steal from my wife. Actually, Dr. Hawthorne, I said, addressing Eric's boss directly, I'm glad you're here too. You should know that Eric has been using Mount Sinai Hospital's name to establish credit lines he had no authorization to open. I pulled out another set of documents, credit applications where Eric had listed himself as Chief Financial Officer of Mount Sinai's Cardiac Surgery Department, a position that didn't exist. He told creditors he was responsible for managing the department's equipment purchases, I continued. He used your hospital's reputation to borrow money for his gambling debts. Dr. Hawthorne's expression shifted from concern to anger as he scanned the documents. Eric, is this true? Did you fraudulently represent yourself as a hospital administrator? I never said I was CFO, Eric protested weakly. There must be some misunderstanding in the paperwork. There's no misunderstanding, I said, holding up a copy of Eric's loan application with his own handwriting clearly visible. He wrote Chief Financial Officer, Mount Sinai Cardiac Surgery, in his own hand. I could see Eric's world collapsing in real time. His medical career, his social standing, his freedom, everything was being destroyed in front of an audience of his peers and colleagues, but I wasn't finished. The most devastating revelations were still to come. Eric, I said, returning my attention to my husband, would you like to tell everyone about Antonia Russo? Or should I explain your relationship with her myself? Eric's face went completely white. I don't know who you're talking about. Really? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph of him and Antonia entering a hotel together. Because you seem to know her well enough to plan your escape to South America with her. The photograph was clear and damning, Eric and a younger woman entering the Plaza Hotel, his hand on her back in an obviously intimate gesture. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days earlier. This is Antonia Russo, I announced to the restaurant, holding up the phone so others could see. She's a professional con artist who specializes in targeting wealthy men with gambling addictions. Eric has been planning to leave the country with her using $12 million of my family's money. Eric made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. Priscilla, you're clearly having a mental health crisis. I think we should call someone to help you. I think that's an excellent idea, I replied calmly. In fact, I've already called someone. I looked toward the restaurant's entrance, where Detective Costa was now standing, his badge clearly visible to everyone in the room. Eric Manning, Detective Costa announced, approaching our table, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. The sound of Detective Costa's handcuffs clicking into place was the most satisfying noise I had ever heard. Eric's wrists were pulled behind his back as he stared at me in disbelief, finally understanding that this had been planned from the beginning. You have the right to remain silent, Detective Costa continued, his voice carrying throughout the now silent restaurant. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is insane, Eric protested, his voice cracking with desperation. Priscilla, tell them this is a misunderstanding. I'm your husband. We can work this out. My husband? I repeated, laughing bitterly. My husband died 2 years ago when you started stealing from me. The man standing here is a criminal who has been living in my house and spending my money while planning to destroy my life. Dr. Hawthorne approached our table, his face pale with shock. Eric, is all of this true? Have you really been forging documents and stealing from your wife? Peter, you have to believe me, Eric pleaded, turning toward his colleague even with his hands cuffed behind his back. Priscilla is having some kind of mental breakdown. She's fabricated all of this evidence. Fabricated? I pulled out my phone and played an audio recording, Eric's own voice from one of Catherine's surveillance operations. His words filled the restaurant. Once I get the 12 million transferred, we'll be on a plane to Argentina within 48 hours. Priscilla will never find us. The silence that followed was deafening. Eric's own voice had just confessed to theft and escape plans in front of his boss, his colleagues, and a room full of witnesses. That's not me, Eric said weakly, but even he seemed to realize how pathetic the denial sounded. Actually, it is you, I said, turning to address the entire restaurant. That recording was made 3 days ago when Eric met with Antonia Russo to finalize their plan to steal my inheritance and flee the country together. Margaret Foster, the president of Mount Sinai's board of directors, stood up from her table near the window. Dr. Manning, you're suspended from all hospital duties effective immediately pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the premises if you attempt to return. The professional destruction was happening in real time, exactly as Catherine had predicted. Eric's medical career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future in ruins. Eric, I said, walking closer to him so he could hear me clearly over the murmur of shocked conversations, do you remember what you said to me at our wedding? You promised to love, honor, and cherish me. You promised to be faithful in good times and bad. Priscilla, please, you promised to share your life with me completely, to be my partner in everything. Do you remember those vows? Eric's eyes filled with tears, though whether from remorse or self-pity, I couldn't tell. I remember. Then you'll understand why I'm keeping the promise I made to myself 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice steady and clear. I promised to make you pay for every lie, every theft, every moment you made me doubt my own judgment. I turned to Detective Costa. Officer, there's something else you should know about Dr. Manning's activities. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, printouts of Eric's internet search history showing his research into life insurance policies and accidental death scenarios. My husband has been researching ways to kill me for my life insurance money, I announced to the room. The theft and fraud were just the beginning. He was planning to murder me and collect my life insurance while living in South America with his accomplice. The collective gasp from the restaurant was audible even over Eric's protests. Several diners stood up from their tables, either to get a better view or to distance themselves from what they were hearing. That's not true. Eric shouted, struggling against his handcuffs. I would never hurt Priscilla. I love her. You love? My money, I corrected coldly. You've never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have spent 2 years systematically destroying everything we built together. Detective Costa consulted his notes. Mrs. Manning, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. The district attorney will be filing additional charges based on the evidence you've provided. Of course, I replied. I want to make sure Eric faces the full consequences of what he's done. As Detective Costa began leading Eric toward the restaurant's exit, my husband turned back to look at me one final time. 23 years, Priscilla, he said, his voice breaking. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I touched my mother's necklace, feeling the weight of 4 generations of strong women who had faced their own challenges with dignity and determination. It means I wasted 23 years trusting a man who was never worthy of that trust. I replied. But it ends tonight. As Detective Costa led Eric toward the restaurant's exit, I felt a moment of perfect clarity. This wasn't just about revenge or justice, it was about reclaiming my identity from a man who had tried to erase me completely. Wait, I called out, causing everyone in the restaurant to freeze. Eric turned back toward me, hope flickering in his eyes that perhaps I was having second thoughts. There's one more thing everyone should know about Dr. Eric Manning, I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. The most important thing of all. I pulled out the final document from my purse, the divorce papers that Robin Caldwell had prepared, already filed and legally binding as of 6 o'clock that evening. Eric thought he was going to divorce me and claim half of my family's assets, I said, holding up the papers. He thought he could abandon me with his gambling debts to dangerous criminals while he lived comfortably in South America on my inheritance. Eric's face went from pale to ashen. Priscilla, what are you saying? I'm saying I divorced you 3 hours ago, I replied calmly. While you were getting ready for our anniversary dinner, thinking you were about to pull off the perfect crime? My attorney was filing papers that legally ended our marriage and protected every dollar of my money. The irony was exquisite. Eric had spent months planning to leave me, researching divorce laws, consulting with attorneys about how to claim my assets. But I had beaten him to it, filing first and ensuring that he would get nothing. You can't do that, Eric protested, his voice cracking. We're married. I have rights. You forfeited your rights when you started forging my signature, I replied. Fraud nullifies any claims you might have had to marital property. You'll be lucky if you don't spend the rest of your life paying restitution for what you've stolen. Dr. Hawthorne shook his head in disgust. Eric, I've known you for 15 years. How could you do this to your wife? How could you destroy everything you've worked for? The man you knew never existed, I answered for Eric. He's been playing a role for 23 years, and tonight the performance finally ended. I turned to address the entire restaurant. One final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting your evening. But I wanted you all to witness the end of the longest con game in Manhattan's history. Marcel, our server, approached cautiously. Mrs. Manning, is there anything we can do for you? Actually, yes, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out my credit card. I'd like to buy dinner for everyone in the restaurant tonight. Consider it a celebration of freedom. The gesture was both generous and symbolic. I was using my own money that Eric could no longer touch, to create a positive memory from this devastating evening. As Eric was led away in handcuffs, he made one final attempt to manipulate me. Priscilla, please. I know I made mistakes. But we can still work this out. I'll get help. I'll pay back every penny. I walked closer to him, close enough that only he could hear my words. Eric, do you want to know the most pathetic part of all this? If you had just asked me for help with your gambling problem, I would have given it to you. If you had been honest about your debts, I would have helped you pay them off. His eyes widened as he realized the truth of what I was saying. But instead, you chose to steal from me, lie to me, and plan to abandon me. You chose to research ways to kill me rather than simply asking for help. That's not addiction, Eric. That's evil. I never meant. Yes, you did, I interrupted. Every signature you forged, every lie you told, every dollar you stole, it was all deliberate. You knew exactly what you were doing. Detective Costa tugged on Eric's arm. Time to go, Dr. Manning. As they reached the restaurant's entrance, Eric turned back one last time. What about Antonia? Are you going to have her arrested too? I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Oh, Eric, you really don't understand what's happening here, do you? Antonia Russo was arrested 2 hours ago at JFK Airport trying to board a flight to Buenos Aires. She's been wanted by the FBI for fraud in 3 different states. Eric's face crumpled as he realized that his escape plan had been compromised from the beginning, that his partner in crime was already in custody, that there was nowhere left to run. The $12 million you thought you were going to steal? I continued. It's all protected now. Every account frozen, every asset secured. You'll never touch a penny of my family's money again. As the restaurant door closed behind Eric and Detective Costa, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. 23 years of marriage were over, but my life was just beginning. The restaurant remained silent for several long moments after Eric's departure, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, conversations began to resume, hushed, incredulous discussions about the dramatic downfall they had just seen unfold. Dr. Hawthorne approached me first, his face still pale with shock. Mrs. Manning, I want you to know that Mount Sinai will cooperate fully with any investigation. What Eric did to you is unconscionable, but what he did to the hospital's reputation is equally serious. Thank you, Dr. Hawthorne, I replied. I hope this won't reflect poorly on the hospital. Eric's crimes were his own. The board will be meeting tomorrow to discuss the full implications, he said. His medical license will almost certainly be revoked permanently. A physician who commits fraud and theft can never practice medicine again. Margaret Foster joined our conversation, her expression grave. Mrs. Manning, as president of the board, I want to personally apologize for any way the hospital might have inadvertently facilitated Eric's deceptions. We'll be implementing new financial oversight procedures immediately. I appreciated their concern, but I could see the calculations behind their words. Mount Sinai was already protecting itself from potential lawsuits and reputation damage. Eric's crimes would have far-reaching consequences beyond his own destruction. Marcel approached with a bottle of champagne. Mrs. Manning, this is from the gentleman at table 12. He said to tell you that justice served is always worth celebrating. I looked toward table 12 and saw an elderly man raising his glass in my direction. Around the restaurant, other diners were beginning to show similar signs of approval. What had started as a shocking public confrontation was being reframed as a victory for justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Antonia Russo has been formally charged with federal fraud. She's looking at 15 years minimum. The South American bank accounts have been frozen and the money recovered. I smiled, reading the message. Eric's entire escape plan had been built on lies and false promises. Antonia had been using him just as much as he had been using me. They deserved each other, but now they would both face justice separately. Another text arrived, this one from Robin Caldwell, all legal filings complete. Your assets are fully protected. Eric has no claim to any marital property due to fraud provisions. The prenup your father insisted on 23 years ago is worth its weight in gold. I had to laugh at the irony. My father had insisted on a prenuptial agreement back in 1999, claiming it would protect the family assets from any potential divorce. Eric had reluctantly signed it, probably thinking it would never matter. He had never bothered to read the fraud provisions that would now leave him with absolutely nothing. A young woman approached my table tentatively. Mrs. Manning? I'm Sarah Chen from the New York Business Journal. I was wondering if you'd be willing to make a statement about what happened here tonight. I considered the request carefully. Part of me wanted to retreat into privacy, to process what had happened away from public scrutiny. But another part of me recognized the opportunity to ensure that Eric's story became a cautionary tale for other women who might be facing similar deceptions. What kind of statement are you looking for? I asked. Just something about how you discovered your husband's crimes and what advice you might have for other women in similar situations. I thought about all the women who might be reading their own husband's text messages, wondering about unexplained absences, noticing changes in behavior they couldn't quite explain. Women who might be making excuses for the people they loved, choosing trust over suspicion even when the evidence was staring them in the face. I'll give you a statement, I said. But not here. Come to my attorney's office tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I want to make sure I say this properly. As Sarah Chen left, I realized that my story was far from over. Eric's arrest was just the beginning of a legal process that would likely take months or even years to resolve completely. There would be trials, sentencing, appeals, and endless paperwork, but for the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. I had taken back control of my life, protected my assets, and ensured that Eric would face real consequences for his actions. The man who had tried to erase me had been erased himself, and I was still standing. Marcel returned to refill my champagne glass. Mrs. Manning, I've been working at this restaurant for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here tonight. You handled that situation with remarkable grace. Thank you, Marcel, I replied. Sometimes grace is the most powerful weapon you can wield. As I sat in the restaurant where my marriage had effectively ended, I felt my mother's necklace resting against my throat, a tangible reminder of the strength that had been passed down through generations of Montgomery women. Tonight, I had proven myself worthy of that legacy. Eric's empire had fallen, but mine was just beginning to rise. 6 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium at Columbia Business School, looking out at 200 young women who had come to hear my story. The invitation to speak had come through the university's Women in Leadership program, and I had accepted because I knew these women needed to hear what I had learned. Ladies, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone, I want to tell you about the most important business lesson I ever learned, and it didn't happen in a boardroom or a negotiation. It happened in a restaurant, on the night I discovered that my husband of 23 years had stolen over $12 million from me. The auditorium was completely silent. These women, most of them in their 20s and 30s, were building careers and planning their futures. They needed to understand that financial independence wasn't just about success, it was about survival. For 23 years, I thought I was in a partnership, I continued. I thought marriage meant sharing everything, trusting completely, believing that the person you love would never deliberately hurt you. I was wrong. I touched my mother's necklace, which had become my signature piece at speaking engagements. It served as a reminder of what I had almost lost and what I had fought to reclaim. The man I married was never the man I thought he was. He was a character in a performance that lasted over 2 decades. While I was building a life with him, supporting his career, sharing my family's wealth and connections, he was planning to destroy me financially and emotionally. I told them about the systematic theft, the forged signatures, the gambling addiction that had consumed our savings. I explained how Eric had researched ways to kill me for insurance money while pretending to love me. I described the moment I realized that trust without verification was just another word for naivety. But here's what I want you to understand, I said, my voice growing stronger. The moment I stopped being a victim and started being an investigator, everything changed. The moment I stopped making excuses for his behavior and started documenting his crimes, I took back my power. I could see women in the audience taking notes, nodding in recognition, some wiping away tears as they recognized their own situations. In my story, Eric is serving 7 years in federal prison. His medical license has been permanently revoked. He lost everything, his career, his freedom, his reputation. Antonia Russo, his accomplice, is serving 15 years for federal fraud across multiple states. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Montgomery, how do you protect yourself without becoming paranoid or destroying trust in future relationships? I smiled at the question because it showed wisdom beyond her years. You protect yourself by understanding that love and vigilance aren't mutually exclusive. You can love someone deeply while still paying attention to their actions, their patterns, their honesty about money and time. Asterisk. I've learned that transparency is the foundation of any real relationship. If someone you love can't show you bank statements, explain their schedule, or account for their activities, that's not privacy, that's secrecy. And secrecy in a marriage is almost always hiding something dangerous. Another hand went up. What advice would you give to women who suspect their partners of financial deception? Trust your instincts, I replied immediately. Women are taught to be understanding, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to avoid conflict. Those qualities make us vulnerable to predators who count on our reluctance to investigate or confront. If something feels wrong, investigate it. Hire a professional if necessary. Protect your assets immediately. Don't wait for more evidence, don't give them a chance to explain, don't hope it will get better. Act first, ask questions later. I looked around the auditorium, seeing the next generation of powerful women who would build their own empires, make their own fortunes, and hopefully avoid the mistakes I had made. Ladies, you have opportunities that previous generations of women could only dream of. You can build wealth, start companies, change the world. But you must protect what you build. You must never allow anyone, not a husband, not a partner, not anyone, to steal your financial security or your future. My mother's necklace represents 4 generations of strong women who faced their challenges with dignity and determination. Tonight, I wear it as a reminder that we don't just inherit jewelry from the women who came before us. We inherit their strength, their wisdom, and their refusal to be diminished by anyone. Eric thought he was stealing from a naive, trusting wife who would never fight back. Instead, he discovered that he had married a Montgomery woman. And Montgomery women don't just survive, we thrive. The applause was thunderous, but more importantly, I could see understanding in their eyes. These women would remember this story when they needed it most. They would trust their instincts, protect their assets, and refuse to be victims. As I left the auditorium that night, I felt my mother's presence more strongly than ever. The necklace around my throat wasn't just jewelry, it was armor, passed down through generations of women who had refused to be broken. Eric had tried to destroy me, but instead, he had made me stronger than I ever thought possible. And now, I was passing that strength on to the next generation of women who would build their own empires and protect them fiercely. The cage door wasn't just open, it had been destroyed completely. And I was finally, truly free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.